I could tell something had changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things, little shifts in the way my stepbrother looked at me or the way his voice lingered when he said my name. Ethan and I had always been close. When our parents married 5 years ago, blending our 2 separate lives into one home, we had bonded almost instantly. He was just 3 years older, and somehow, despite not sharing a drop of blood, we understood each other in ways no one else did. Now, at 21, he had grown into himself, broad shoulders, an easy confidence, a quiet charisma that made people gravitate toward him. And in a week, I would turn 18. For some reason, my birthday had become an event to Ethan. He insisted on throwing a huge party, going as far as planning every little detail himself. At first, I thought it was sweet. He had always been protective, looking out for me in ways that made me feel safe. But lately, his behavior had shifted. I first noticed it one evening when we were watching a movie together. He had picked an old classic, something we had seen 100 times, but instead of focusing on the screen, I felt his eyes on me. When I glanced at him, he didn't look away like he normally would. Instead, he held my gaze, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "What?" I asked, laughing lightly, trying to dispel the strange tension in the air. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. "Nothing. Just thinking about how different things are going to be soon." The way he said it sent a small shiver down my spine. I sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring my spoon through a bowl of cereal as my parents brought up my birthday for what felt like the 100th time that week. "So, sweetheart," my mom said, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of my dad. "Have you decided if you want it to be a big family gathering or just something with your friends?" I barely had time to think before Ethan, sitting across from me, leaned forward. "Only friends," he said with a casual certainty, like the matter had already been decided. "Come on, Mom. Family gatherings are always so dull. A bunch of old people sitting around, asking about school and life plans, telling embarrassing stories. Who wants that?" My dad chuckled. "That's what families do, Ethan." "Exactly," Ethan countered, flashing me a knowing look. "And that's why they shouldn't be there." He turned his attention back to me, eyebrows raised. "Right." I hesitated for a moment. Traditionally, birthdays in our family had always been mixed events. Relatives dropping by, kids running around, adults drinking wine and chatting in the backyard. It was predictable, familiar. But the idea of having just my friends, of a night that was ours and ours alone, sounded freeing. Ethan must have sensed my wavering because he pushed on, his voice dipping into that easy, persuasive tone he always used when he wanted to win. "Think about it, Squirt," he teased, using the nickname he'd given me years ago. "We could actually have fun. No one's going to be nagging you about college applications or how grown up you are now. Just music, drinks, your friends. Real fun." My parents exchanged a glance, but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Well," my dad said, setting down his mug, "it's your birthday. If that's what you want, we won't interfere." "Yeah," my mom added with a smile. "We were thinking of visiting your grandparents that weekend anyway. We'll just go on the day of your birthday, let you have the house to yourself." I opened my mouth, surprised. "Wait, you guys won't even be here?" "We trust you," my dad said with an easy shrug. "And we know Ethan will be around to make sure everything's okay." That's when I glanced at Ethan. He was watching, not in a casual, passing way, but in a way that made my stomach feel strangely weightless. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and satisfied, like he had gotten exactly what he wanted. And I had given it to him. The week leading up to my birthday passed in a blur. Ethan took over planning the party with the kind of enthusiasm I had never seen from him before. He helped me finalize the guest list, suggesting names I hadn't even considered. He picked the music, made sure there would be enough drinks and snacks, even talked about setting up some lights in the backyard to give it more of a vibe. It was so unlike him. Ethan was never the type to care about parties. He had always been the type to show up late, lounge on a couch with a beer in hand, and watch as things unfolded around him. But this time, he was in control. He made sure I wasn't involved in any of the tedious parts of planning, brushing me off whenever I tried to help. "It's your birthday," he'd say. "Just let me handle it." I should have questioned it, but I didn't. The night before my birthday, I was in my room going over last-minute details when there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in." Ethan stepped inside, hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. "You excited for tomorrow?" I smiled, nodding. "Yeah. It still feels kind of weird that Mom and Dad won't be here, though." Ethan leaned against my dresser, his gaze flickering toward my window before settling back on me. "They're giving you a gift," he said simply. "Freedom." The way he said it sent a strange, unfamiliar shiver down my spine. Silence settled between us for a beat before he tilted his head, studying me. "You trust me, don't you?" I frowned. "Of course, why wouldn't I?" His lips twitched into a small smirk. "Just making sure." I didn't get the chance to ask him what he meant because, before I could say anything, he reached forward and ruffled my hair in a way that was both familiar and oddly intimate. "Go to sleep," he murmured. "Tomorrow's going to be a long night." And with that, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. The day of my birthday arrived, and everything felt surreal. My parents left early in the morning, hugging me and telling me to be safe. My mom's parting words were, "Don't let Ethan talk you into anything crazy," to which Ethan had simply grinned and replied, "Wouldn't dream of it." By the afternoon, everything was set up. The house looked different, dimmer, warmer. Ethan had draped soft string lights along the backyard fence, and the living room was cleared of unnecessary furniture, leaving space for dancing or whatever else the night had in store. By the time the first guests arrived, the air buzzed with anticipation. Music played low at first, growing louder as more people filled the house. Laughter echoed through the rooms, the clinking of drinks punctuating the sound. And through it all, Ethan was watching. He moved through the party with a quiet confidence, always nearby but never lingering too long in any one place. He wasn't drinking much, just enough to blend in, but not enough to lose control. Every time I turned around, he was there. Sometimes he was talking to my friends, effortlessly charming as always. Other times, he was just watching, eyes sharp and unreadable. And then, at some point, I lost sight of him. I had been talking to a group of friends in the kitchen when I realized he was gone. Not just stepped out for a smoke gone, but completely gone. I excused myself and wandered through the house, past groups of people laughing, dancing, enjoying the night. Something in my chest tightened as I searched for him, a quiet unease building in my stomach. Finally, I found him. He was outside, leaning against the wooden fence, away from the crowd. His gaze was on the sky, a cigarette dangling loosely from his fingers. I stepped forward, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Ethan!" He turned to look at me, exhaling a slow stream of smoke. "Having fun?" "Yeah," I said, then hesitated. "Why aren't you inside?" His lips quirked into a smirk, but there was something almost knowing in his eyes. "Just needed some air." Something about the way he said it sent my heart into an uneven rhythm. Before I could say anything else, he flicked his cigarette away, straightened up, and stepped closer. "Come on, squirt," he murmured, his voice lower than before. "It's your party. Let's make sure it's a night you'll never forget." I swallowed hard, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin. Something told me that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. Ethan's fingers curled around mine, warm, steady, and undeniably firm, as he pulled me toward the makeshift dance floor in the living room. The space had been cleared earlier, leaving only the soft glow of string lights casting flickering shadows against the walls. Music pulsed through the house, a rhythm that felt like it was syncing with my heartbeat. "Come on, birthday girl," Ethan said, flashing me a lazy grin. "Let's dance." I let out a breathy laugh, my pulse quickening. "You hate dancing." He shrugged. "Tonight's different." And just like that, he led me toward the center of the room, weaving effortlessly through the crowd of moving bodies. Before I could say anything else, he grabbed 2 cocktails from the counter, one for me, one for him. The glass was cool against my fingertips as he handed it to me, and when our eyes met over the rim of our drinks, there was something different there. Something unspoken. "To 18," he murmured, lifting his glass toward mine. I clinked mine against his, the sound barely audible over the music. "To 18." The first sip was sweet and deceptively light, but it burned just enough as it went down. Ethan watched as I took another sip, his eyes dark with something unreadable. Then, without another word, he set his glass down and reached for me again. "Dance with me." I hesitated for a second, but before I could think too much about it, he pulled me closer. And I let him. Dancing with Ethan felt different from dancing with anyone else. It wasn't like when my friends pulled me into a chaotic circle, jumping and swaying with wild laughter. It wasn't like when someone at a party grabbed my hand, twirling me around playfully before disappearing into the crowd. No, dancing with Ethan was something else entirely. At first, we kept it light. The music was fast, the beat intoxicating, and we moved easily in sync. His hands rested at my waist, guiding me through the rhythm, and I followed without thinking. Then the music changed. A slower song, deep and rich with something unspoken beneath the melody. The kind of song that made the air between 2 people shift. Ethan didn't step away. Neither did I. His hand slid from my waist to the small of my back, pulling me in a little closer. I could feel the warmth of him, the scent of his cologne mixed with the faintest trace of smoke. His heartbeat thrummed against mine, steady and unshaken. "You're a good dancer," I murmured, feeling lightheaded, not from the drink, but from something else entirely. Ethan's lips curled at the corner, but his voice was softer when he said, "Only with you." My stomach flipped. We swayed together, caught in something neither of us was naming. His fingers brushed against my bare skin, just below the hem of my top, and I swallowed hard. He was watching me again, like he had all night, like he had for the past week. And then, pain shot through my ankle. I gasped as my foot twisted beneath me, my balance disappearing in an instant. "Whoa!" Ethan reacted fast, his grip tightening around me as I collapsed forward. The world spun for a brief second before I found myself pressed against his chest, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "You okay?" His voice was lower now, close to my ear. I winced, trying to put weight on my foot, but the sharp sting made me suck in a breath. "I think I twisted my ankle." Ethan didn't hesitate. Before I could protest, he scooped me up effortlessly, his arms firm and steady beneath me. The world blurred as he carried me through the party, past the curious glances and whispered questions. I should have been embarrassed, but all I could think about was how safe I felt in his arms. Ethan brought me to my room, pushing the door open with his foot before stepping inside. The moment he set me down on the edge of the bed, he crouched in front of me, his fingers already reaching for my ankle. "Let me see." I shook my head, still breathless. "It's fine. Let me see," he repeated, more insistent this time. His hands were warm against my skin as he gently lifted my foot, his touch surprisingly careful for someone who was usually so effortlessly rough. I watched as he pressed his fingers lightly along the curve of my ankle, his expression unreadable. "Does this hurt?" I winced. "A little." His jaw tightened, and for a moment he just stared at me, long enough for my skin to prickle with heat. Then he let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You're reckless, you know that." I laughed softly. I was just dancing. His eyes flickered up to meet mine. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's what worries me." A strange silence settled between us. The party continued to pulse outside my door, but in here, It felt like we were in a world of our own. Then, without warning, Ethan's fingers brushed against my knee. It was a small touch, barely anything, but it sent a slow, creeping heat up my spine. He must have noticed my reaction because his lips quirked into something dangerously close to a smirk. "Do you want me to wrap it?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I swallowed hard. "You know how to do that." Ethan let out a soft chuckle, standing up and walking toward my dresser. He opened one of the drawers without asking, pulling out the small first aid kit my mom always kept there. "I've had my fair share of injuries," he said, tossing me a glance over his shoulder. "You think Mom never made me learn?" I smiled, shaking my head. "Guess I should be grateful." "You should be," he murmured, returning to his spot in front of me. I watched as he carefully unwrapped the bandage, his fingers steady as he worked. The air between us felt heavier now, thick with something neither of us acknowledged. His hands skimmed my skin, his touch lingering just a second longer than necessary. And when he looked up at me again, his face just inches from mine, I forgot how to breathe. His gaze dropped to my lips for the briefest moment. Then he smirked. "There," he said, tying off the bandage with practiced ease. "All set." I exhaled, my chest tightening. "Thanks," I murmured. Ethan didn't move right away. He stayed there, crouched in front of me, his hands resting on my legs. And then, almost too softly, he said, "You scared me for a second." I blinked. "What?" "When you fell." His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I don't know. It just—" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You're important to me, Squirt." Something inside me twisted. I knew what he meant, but I also knew there was something more beneath his words. Something I wasn't sure either of us was ready to say out loud. And yet, as the music outside continued to play, as the party carried on without us, I realized one thing. Ethan wasn't just my stepbrother. He was something else entirely. And whatever this was between us, it was only just beginning. The air between us was thick with something neither of us dared to name. Ethan was still crouched in front of me, his hands resting gently on my legs, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. I should have said something. I should have laughed it off, brushed away the tension like it was nothing. But I didn't. I couldn't, because the way Ethan was looking at me made it impossible to ignore. His fingers curled slightly against my skin, and I felt it, felt the warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his gaze flickered just for a second down to my lips. He didn't move right away. Neither did I. But then, as if pulled by some unseen force, he leaned in. And I let him. The moment our lips met, the world around us disappeared. It was slow at first, hesitant, uncertain, like he was giving me time to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I melted into it, into him, my fingers tightening against the fabric of his hoodie as his hand came up to cup the side of my face. The kiss deepened, and for the first time, everything that had been building between us for weeks, maybe even months, finally spilled over. I don't know how long we stayed like that, tangled in the quiet heat of the moment, but when we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Ethan's forehead rested against mine, his fingers still tracing slow, gentle circles against my jaw. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice low, rough. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I didn't tell him to stop. And that night, nothing else mattered. 1 month later, something was wrong. At first, I brushed it off as nothing, just stress maybe. A bad diet, not enough sleep. But then the nausea started. It wasn't just in the mornings. It would creep up on me at random moments, after eating something I usually loved, after catching a strong scent in the air. My stomach felt unsettled more often than not, and then there was the appetite shift. One day, I craved pickles and ice cream. The next, the mere thought of either made me gag. And then, my period was late. Really late. I tried not to panic. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I already knew. I stood in the bathroom, staring at the test in my trembling hands. The 2 pink lines felt like they were taunting me, confirmation of something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was pregnant. My breath came in short, uneven bursts as I sat down on the edge of the tub, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't keep this a secret. Not from Ethan. But the moment I told him, everything would change. Still, I had no choice. That evening, I found him in his room, sprawled out on his bed, scrolling through his phone. "Ethan," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. He looked up immediately, his gaze sharpening at the sight of my face. "What's wrong?" I hesitated. I need to tell you something." He sat up instantly, setting his phone aside. "Okay," he said carefully. "Tell me." I swallowed hard. The words felt like lead on my tongue, but I forced them out anyway. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then, Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Are you sure?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I took a test. It was positive." He didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, his jaw clenched, his fingers threading through his hair as he processed what I had just told him. And then, finally, "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice steady. I blinked. "What?" Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. I said, "We'll figure this out. I'm not going anywhere." Something inside me cracked, and before I could stop myself, I let out a shaky breath. "Ethan!" He reached for my hands, gripping them tightly. "Hey," he murmured, squeezing gently. "You're not alone in this. I'm with you." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I quickly blinked them away. "But what are we supposed to do?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the words that would change everything. "We have to leave." I frowned. "Leave?" He nodded, his grip on my hands tightening. "We can't stay here. If our parents find out," he cut himself off, shaking his head, "they'll never understand. And I'm not going to let them take this decision away from us." The weight of what he was saying hit me all at once. Run away. Leave everything behind. It sounded insane, but at the same time, it was the only option. If we stayed, we would be forced apart. If we stayed, they would try to control everything, tell us what we could and couldn't do, take away whatever chance we had of figuring this out on our terms. And I knew Ethan. When he made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. "We'll take what we need," he continued, his voice firm. "Get a head start before anyone realizes we're gone. We'll figure things out along the way." My heart pounded. Could we really do this? Could we just leave? Ethan must have sensed my hesitation because he leaned in closer, his voice softer now. "Do you trust me?" I exhaled shakily. "Yes." "Then let's go." And just like that, our decision was made. We were running away. Together.